Good evening. My name is Anelisa Garfunkel, and I'm a visual storyteller. I tell stories using live-action film, illustration, and prose. I originally got into storytelling as a filmmaker. This is me on a boat in off the island of Lehlia up in the Marshall Islands. So this was where I started making films. I've been doing it for about 15 years. And recently I showed a film of mine to a friend, and he said, "I love it, this is so you." And I kind of thought, oh, what does that mean? That seemed like sort of an insult, but I know he didn't mean it that way, and I thought about, what is so me? Because at that point, I really didn't know, and I've done a lot of work, made a lot of different kinds of movies, but I don't think I had any sort of underlying thing that was me. So I wanted to explore what my influences were and what my inspirations were and what kind of themes I could find in my work so I could see what he was talking about. This is me about 15 feet in the air climbing on the treehouse my father built for my brothers and me. I was about 2. So I was the baby, but I did everything my brothers did, and I was pretty fearless. Adventure was always a big part of our lives. One famous story in my family was when we were picnicking way high in the Alps, and my brothers decided to climb up the side of the mountain, which was quite steep, and I followed them because I always follow them. And it got way too steep for them, and they left and went back down to eat. And my parents said, "Where is she?" And they looked up, and I was way up, and I just kept going and going and going. Nothing was going to stop me until my father scrambled up after me and dragged me down and gave me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. My dad instilled in us, or maybe it's part of our DNA, an insatiable wanderlust, a great sense of adventure and desire to challenge boundaries, which didn't always pay off so well, but certainly led for an interesting life for all of us. While my stories are usually character-based, they often involve adventure, not just as a plot, but really as a much larger part of the story. I set my stories outside in the natural world, and the environment becomes a character in itself. I'm really interested in what we learn when we push our boundaries, whether they're physical or emotional. I think when we move out of our comfort zone, we really learn a lot about ourselves. One of my more recent projects is a short film called Melt. Melt is about 2 sisters who reluctantly join forces on an adventure through the frozen streets of their small New England town, each on a quest to reclaim what they have lost. The girls don't travel very far, they only go a few miles from home, but for them, it's an epic adventure. Eva, who's the girl in the wheelchair, wants to feel like herself again. She enlists her sister, the only person who doesn't treat her differently since her accident, to help get her across town on a frigid March day so she can do the one thing that will remind her of the person she still is, but is lost through the accident. I shot this in my hometown of Winthrop, Massachusetts, which is a small town just north of Boston. This story comes from the memory of my dad, who, when I was 18, had a catastrophic accident while playing squash. He went after a ball, hit his head, and was paralyzed from the neck down. The accident changed everything for him. He was very independent, adventurous. He was really just kind of an amazing person that suddenly was trapped in a wheelchair and with a body that didn't work. So instead of stopping being who he was, the adventures changed. He didn't climb mountains or sail across seas. He found other ways to challenge himself and to get excited about it. So he would take his assist dog, Truman, and would go outside in his motorized wheelchair, and they would just go through the streets of our small 1 square mile town. And they would get into all sorts of trouble. And they would get stuck in the mud, and he would have to make Truman speak so that they could get attention, and then someone would come and get them out, or he would the wheelchair would fall over, and these were like the kind of things that a lot of people would be terrified about and wouldn't want to leave the house. But he would come home and he would call wherever we were, he'd say, "You know what happened to me today?" And he would tell us about these stories, because for him, this was life, this is how he lived. And it was the same for my character in the story, and that's kind of where that all comes from. And this is her doing the thing that she loves. And this is my dad and my dog, Truman, who played a big part. I think this was right after he graduated, and Truman was the valedictorian of his class. I'm not lying. Anyway, through all of the adventures, my father pushed us to do more, and my mother told us it was okay if we didn't. But really, I don't want to diminish her contribution. Over the years, she proved to be more fearless than any of us. She went through law school with 3 small children. She took care of my dad through his injury, which was no small feat. And she survived watching her 3 children do really scary and risky things all over the world. And after my dad died, she moved to a small Pacific island to become a Peace Corps country director by herself. And I went and lived with her. She's taught me everything about being a woman. This is me at 2, wearing an Equal Rights Amendment t-shirt. So you can see feminism was strong in my family. I come from a small blue-collar town where everyone is Irish or Italian Catholic. I'm half Puerto Rican and half Jewish, and raised without religion at all. I was different. People in my town had strong opinions about what girls should and shouldn't do, and so did my parents. I was raised not just to believe that I was equal, but pushed to be equal. That's why I did everything my brothers did. We all chopped wood, we learned how to build fires in the wood stove, we cooked, we cleaned, we drove the boat. We were equal. So I tell stories about women and girls that have no limitations, to see themselves as I see myself, and to how I want my daughter to see herself. This is a short film called Me Time, about a new mother who's trying to balance career and family and feeling like she is failing. She's advised to make time for herself, like we all, if you're a mother, or I guess it's not fathers. Fathers always have time. Mothers are told to make time for themselves, but it's nearly impossible. So she goes to her favorite place in the middle of the winter, which is the beach. All she can think about, though, is the long list of things she has to do and how much she misses her daughter. It was actually less than 0 when we shot this, and the wind was whipping, and the actress had a hole in her boot, and I made her dance in the water. So it was a grueling short film to shoot, but as I've said, I like adventure. So, and it was the first film I made after my daughter was born. So as I was making this film, I was also thinking about what she was doing and all the things that I had to do. She was just 1.5 years at that point. This was an important story for me because it was the first exploration into writing about motherhood, and also the first time that I felt like I had something to say. I felt like I always wanted to tell stories, and I struggled and thought about like what the story was going to be about. And for so long, I felt like you have to have something to say, and you have to figure out what that is. And so this was the first time. Like it took me a long time to figure out what this was going to be about, and then when I did it, it was like a revelation. That's her dancing in the water. So there's adventure, and there's womankind or feminism, and then there's identity, which is probably the thing that I've been most fascinated with since I was a little kid. This is my parents in the early 70s, and the thing is, when you're half of one thing and half of another, and you grow up in a place where neither of those things exist, who you are and where you belong become a continuous quest. And they are, as I've looked back, in everything I do, this quest for who I am. And the thing I've learned is that when you don't fall into a particular category, identity really becomes about who you are and not about being part of a group. So this is a book I wrote and illustrated last year as part of the visual narrative program. It's really the first book, or it was a zine, that I ever wrote and illustrated. And I'm not an illustrator. I don't have an art background. It's a story about my grandmother, my mother, my daughter, and me, and a lot of chickens. It was an attempt to write about this maternal line, about who I was and where I come from, that connected. We were all connected by blood, but the story spans islands and cities and generations, and it was trying to kind of draw them all together and figure out how they're connected. It's the lead up to my thesis, and it was the project that gave me the confidence and the vision to move away from film and create an illustrated book, which is my thesis project. This is Lehlia Luz. She's a 12-year-old girl from a small Pacific island who is half Quesamese, a fictional island, and half American Latina. In the first term of the visual narrative program, a number of things happened. First, I was challenged with exploring other mediums, which is part of the reason I wanted to study in the program. I explored and developed a more cohesive understanding of what I wanted to say as a storyteller, and I created this character. She's inspired by a lifetime of living near or on the ocean. I grew up, as I said, in just outside of Boston, on a town that's surrounded more or less on all sides by ocean. And after I graduated from undergrad, I spent 2 years sailing up and down the Atlantic Ocean and in and around the Caribbean. And then when my mom moved to the Pacific, I promised her that I would come and stay with her, and I came for 3 weeks and stayed for 3 years. And that's where I got into, that's where I learned how to make films. I lived on the tiny island of Pohnpei in the Federated States of Micronesia. And in Pohnpei, I learned a lot of things. My job was to create educational films. So I spent my time traveling around the many islands, learning about the various socioeconomic issues that threaten their communities, and writing and producing films about and for the people. Lehlia's story began in the first summer here. This is a clip from the stop motion animation that was really the first rendering of the story. I think it's evolved since then, but. So this was the first animation I'd done, aside from stuff I'd done with a lot of other people. And it was, as I said, the first rendering of Lehlia. Okay, so this is the book, Conjuring in the Gyre. It's, as you can see, a graphic black and white cutout style, and I drew inspiration from the traditional wood carvings that you find all over Micronesia. Lehlia lives on an isolated island that once had rich traditions and a strong connection to the natural world. But since the influx of Western money and Western goods has been left largely depleted of a sustainable way of life. Modernization and climate change have stripped the oceans and her island, like much of the rest of the world at this point, and her island is very vulnerable. A catastrophic wave wipes away everything on the island but Lehlia and her grandmother. Her grandmother, Elke, hours away from death, reminds Lehlia of the stories of her people. She tells her that her survival depends upon her connection to the natural world. After Elke dies, Lehlia leaves the island in search of a new home. And I'd like to read something from the story. Under the searing rays of the sun, she was able to focus on what was now, a never-ending sea stretching out far and wide in every direction she turned. But in the darkness of night, she was swallowed by the heartbreaking pain of her loss. As much as she tried to fend off her sorrow, night after night, a wave of grief would overcome her. After 15 days at sea, her stores were low, her will wilted. Her grandmother's voice began to fill the hollow space inside of her. She fought it off, closed her eyes, blocked her ears, hummed, anything to push the memories away, but they stood firm. She heard her grandmother asking her questions, telling her stories, reminding her of who she was. The stories filled her up, spilling into the air, puffing out the sails. Her canoe picked up speed. The stories, her memories, her heartbreak, would carry her to her new home, and she in turn knew that she would always carry them as well. As her journey progresses, things get worse and worse. She's pulled into a brutal current. It is the mythic Great Pacific Gyre, a toxic vortex thriving on the waste of a throwaway world. The gyre in my story is inspired by a real-life phenomenon that's called the Great Pacific Gyre. The Great Pacific Gyre is in the northern Pacific Ocean. It's like a giant whirlpool. The whirlpool effect of the gyre has, for years, been pulling in all the tiny bits of garbage that float in the ocean, pelagic plastics, chemical sludge, and other debris. It's been called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, or the Pacific Trash Vortex. I took some liberties with my gyre and made the debris kind of large, recognizable objects, and imagine just like garbage for miles and miles, so much so that you can't even see the water beneath it. The toxic waste of the gyre spawns a vicious sea monster called the mongarang. Together, between the gyre and the mongarang, they threaten the entire planet. And Lehlia is stuck right in the middle of it. So she must find a way to defeat the monster to survive so she can move on to find a new home. The climax of the story centers around this battle in the gyre between the mongarang and Lehlia. And so what I did visually is I decided to, this is the gyre from above, but I decided to force the reader to actually turn the book like they're spinning around in the gyre. And so you can see just a few spreads where that happens for the next 3 spreads. To me, Lehlia's story is about identity. Her very existence is a symbol of the harmony that we must find between old and new, between the natural world and the man-made world. Her search for balance within is our search for balance in this world. I see this story as part of a larger story, where Lehlia continues on to find her father, who lives in America, but when she gets there, finds even greater imbalance, and her quest becomes about saving more than herself. I'll close just with one more reading from the book. All that was never taught to them, they learned from the world around them. Our language is written in our world, in the sea and the stars and the clouds and all around us. As long as we can read the stories of our people in our surroundings, we will always be. Thank you very much.
Hey. So your book is really stunning and beautiful, and I know that coming in as a filmmaker to a really sort of illustration-heavy program must have been difficult. Can you talk a little bit about building your confidence with this illustration style?
I don't even know if I'm that confident. No, it was really hard. I mean, this whole process was, right from the beginning of this program. There wasn't a lot of time to make films, so I was really forced. And I think a lot of it happened last year. Shivering, I'm sorry. A lot of it happened last year in our visual writing class. It was all kind of just write and illustrate and just do stuff and don't think about it. And I think from that, I started to gain confidence. And I think just from all of you, being around you and having people give me feedback and say, you can do this. I didn't start out, this project didn't start out as an illustrated project or live action, and there was going to be a whole bunch of other things involved in it, and it just kind of kept moving. This project really just wanted to be what it was, and I didn't have a lot of control.
As was just pointed out, you came in more as a filmmaker, but since this book is so strong, what do you want to do with it now?
Get it published. No, I mean, I've always, even from the very beginning of this story, I always saw it as this trilogy. So I don't know if I want to just like do 2 more short stories, or like take this story and make it into something bigger. I don't really know how it's going to work out. I also think it would make a great movie. So, but yeah, no, I definitely, she still has more to do. She hasn't figured it all out yet.
Hello. Sort of 2-part question. One is, how would you describe the audience for this sort of work, since you're coming from such a different place and developed this illustrative style during this program, which is really, really impressive and amazing. So how would you describe the audience at large? And also, I'm wondering how your daughter has responded to this sort of journey and this story that you've made.
Well, my daughter is very upset because she doesn't like that I go to work and stay there for many hours. But she's very excited about graduation on Friday. Yeah, it's been hard on her. It definitely has. But in terms of, I see it as it's for young adults, although I do feel like, it's kind of for all ages except for little kids. Yeah. And I also think that there's like a really strong audience for lit or environmental literature. So I feel like that sort of spans ages. That's kind of part of where I want to.
I'm very inspired by you on many levels, not just because you did all of these things at once. I have no idea. I mean, I sort of do it, but not even close to a project as ambitious as what you've accomplished here. But I'm also inspired by your love for adventure. So I'm really curious if you could talk about what you want to do next and where you want to go. I know you want to travel, and kind of where you see yourself going in the next couple of years.
Well, I'm going to Iceland in August. That's the first adventure. But no, I really want to. I've been raising my daughter. She speaks Spanish, and I want to keep that. So I would like to go to South America for at least a year and write and work and just keep her education going and introduce her to other cultures and other worlds. So that's been the plan for a while. I'm just working towards it.
I think I remember you saying at some point that I'm not an artist. Is that a quote?
Yeah.
It made me very curious as you went on to see what your art was going to be like, and I was quite impressed. And I thought it was very smart of you to take on the look of these woodcuts of Polynesia, which you carried off very well. But they were quite strong as visuals. I thought they worked quite beautifully. I mean, they were playful. I mean, they just worked, and the page layouts were quite beautiful too. So your talent with black and white, and I thought that was very smart to limit your vocabulary, since you were a little shaky about that, but you definitely pulled it off. But I would just like to hear you just say a few words about how you feel now as an artist, and how much you. I guess I want to hear that you own that, because I think you are an artist.
Thank you.
Can you say a few words about? I mean, was there an evolution that you? I mean, do you feel a little more like an artist now than when you began?
Definitely. I think when I said that I'm not an artist, I meant in the I don't paint and draw and all of that. But even as a filmmaker, I think it took me a really long time to think of myself as an artist. But yeah, I feel, and I think I talked about, figuring out what I wanted to say and feeling like that was important. And to me, that's where identifying myself as an artist comes from. Like, not so much being able to draw something or make a film about it, but knowing what I want to say and knowing what my voice is and what I can uniquely offer to the world. So yes, I would say I am an artist. I'll say it here. But yeah, I think it was definitely something that's happened over the last few years that I feel, I don't know how I would have answered this question last year, but yeah, I feel more confident and more strong about what I have to say and how I'm going to say it.
Thank you, Anelisa.